Colorado Territory, 1868. The sunset painted the Rocky Mountain foothills in streaks of amber and gold, silhouetting the lone rider against the vast wilderness. Garrick pulled his hat lower as he urged his sorrel stallion up the winding trail, his 26-year-old frame tense with vigilance. 3 years since the war had ended, yet the frontier remained a place where a moment's inattention could leave a man dead. A cool autumn breeze carried the scent of pine and sage as Cole scanned the horizon, his hand never straying far from the Colt revolver at his hip. His journey had been long, too long, with nothing but his own thoughts and the occasional coyote howl for company. That was how he preferred it. The war had taught him that attachments were dangerous things, leading only to grief. Surviving meant staying unencumbered, unburdened by connections that could be severed by a stray bullet or an Apache arrow. The small town of Silverpine emerged from the gathering dusk, a collection of wooden structures nestled against the mountainside like a fortress against the wilderness. Cole had not planned to stop here, but his provisions were running low, and both he and his horse needed rest. Just a night or two, he told himself, enough to resupply and move on. He never stayed anywhere long enough for people to remember his face or ask questions about his past. As Cole rode down the main street, the windows of the saloon blazed with lamplight, the piano music drifting into the evening air. A few townsfolk glanced his way, eyes appraising the newcomer with the wariness common to frontier settlements. He nodded curtly but avoided eye contact. The less people saw of him, the better. He dismounted outside the livery stable, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. The stable boy, no more than 12, emerged from the shadows. "Take good care of him," Cole said, pressing a coin into the boy's palm. "He has carried me far." "Yes, sir. Where are you headed?" "Nowhere in particular," Cole replied, the lie comfortable on his tongue. He had been nowhere in particular for 3 years now. After securing a room at the modest boarding house, Cole made his way to the general store before it closed. The bell above the door announced his entrance, and the shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Evening, stranger. What can I help you with?" "Just supplies," Cole said, placing his hat on the counter. "Enough for a week's journey. Heading west." "Maybe." Cole kept his tone neutral, discouraging further inquiry. The shopkeeper nodded, recognizing the type. The war had created thousands of men like Cole, rootless, haunted, moving through the territory like ghosts. He began gathering the requested items without further conversation. Cole's attention drifted to the window, where a woman stood across the street. Even in the fading light, something about her caught his eye. She wore a simple blue dress that seemed to catch the last rays of the setting sun, her chestnut hair falling in waves down her back. She turned slightly, and even from this distance he could see she was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with a grace that seemed out of place in this rough-hewn town. "That's Miss Lydia Abbott," the shopkeeper said, following Cole's gaze. "Schoolteacher, came out west last spring from Boston. Smart as a whip, that one." Cole nodded dismissively, annoyed at being caught staring. "How much for the supplies?" After paying, he stepped outside, deliberately turning away from where the schoolteacher had been standing. He had no business noticing women, especially not ones with educated Eastern backgrounds. The frontier was no place for such things, and Cole Garrick was certainly no man for a woman like that. His resolve lasted precisely 3 steps before he glanced back. She was gone, but the impression remained, like an afterimage on his vision. That night, as he lay on the hard mattress in his rented room, Cole reminded himself of the lesson he had learned in Blood and Ashes. The only safe way to live was alone. Connections meant vulnerabilities. Caring for someone meant having something to lose, and out here in this untamed wilderness, loss was the only certainty. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of chestnut hair catching the light of a setting sun. Morning arrived with a clarity unique to the mountain air. Cole rose early, intending to conclude his business in town quickly. He ate a sparse breakfast at the boarding house, ignoring attempts at conversation from the other lodgers, then headed to the livery to check on his horse. The main street was coming to life, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, freight wagons rumbling toward the mercantile. Cole walked with purpose, his spurs making a rhythmic sound against the packed dirt. He was so focused on maintaining his customary invisibility that he nearly collided with someone exiting the post office. "Oh," a soft exclamation as papers scattered to the ground. Cole instinctively reached out to steady the person he had almost knocked over, finding himself gripping the arm of the schoolteacher he had noticed the previous evening. Up close he could see her eyes were a clear green, widened in surprise. "I beg your pardon, ma'am," he said, quickly releasing her arm and kneeling to gather the fallen papers. "I was not watching where I was going." "Neither was I, apparently," she replied, kneeling alongside him. Her voice carried the refined tones of the East, but with a warmth that softened its formality. As they both reached for the same sheet, their hands brushed. Cole withdrew as if burned, handing her the collected papers with as much dignity as he could muster. "Thank you, mister," she inquired. "Garrick." "Cole Garrick," he stood, offering his hand to help her rise. "Lydia Abbott." She accepted his assistance, standing gracefully despite the dusty street. "Are you new to Silverpine, Mr. Garrick?" "Just passing through," he said, stepping back to a respectable distance. Up close he could see that she was beautiful in a natural, unaffected way that made the painted women in saloons seem garish by comparison. Her chestnut hair was pinned up simply, revealing a slender neck and delicate jawline. Her dress, though plain, was tailored to fit her form properly, speaking of Eastern refinement. "Well, Mr. Garrick, Silverpine may surprise you. People often find reasons to stay longer than they intended." She smiled, and something inside Cole's carefully constructed armor shifted uncomfortably. "Not me, ma'am. I have found that staying in one place too long can be unhealthy." Her expression changed, a flicker of understanding passing across her features. "You fought in the war." It wasn't a question, and Cole didn't treat it as one. "If you will excuse me, Miss Abbott, I have business to attend to." He tipped his hat and moved to step around her, but she spoke again. "The schoolhouse needs repairs before winter sets in. The town council is paying good wages for skilled hands." She held his gaze steadily. "Just in case you were looking for a reason to stay a while longer." Before Cole could formulate a response, she smiled again and continued on her way, leaving him standing in the middle of the street feeling as though a whirlwind had passed through. He watched her go, noting the curious glances from townspeople who had observed their interaction. Attachments were dangerous, connections were vulnerabilities. He repeated these truths to himself as he continued toward the livery, his steps more hurried than before. The stable boy was feeding the horses when Cole arrived. "Your stallion's got a loose shoe, mister," he said without preamble. "Blacksmith says he can fix it, but he's backed up with work. Won't get to it until tomorrow, maybe the day after." Cole swore under his breath. A delay was the last thing he needed, especially now. "Fine," he said curtly. "Tell him to make it a priority." With his immediate departure thwarted, Cole found himself at loose ends. The thought of sitting idle in his boarding house room held little appeal. Almost against his will, he found himself walking toward the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple wooden structure, weathered by mountain winters and summer sun. True to Lydia's words, it showed signs of neglect: loose boards on the porch, a sagging section of roof, windows that needed recaulking before the snow came. Cole stood across the street, observing as children filed inside, followed by their teacher. Through the open door he caught a glimpse of Lydia at the front of the room, her posture straight, her manner confident as she called the class to order. This was not his world. He had no place here among civilized folk trying to carve something permanent from the wilderness. And yet, as he turned to leave, the words of the town council's offer echoed in his mind: good wages, a few days' work. His horse needed the time to rest properly anyway. That afternoon found Cole speaking with the mayor, a former Union officer named Hargrove, about the schoolhouse repairs. "Mighty glad to have someone with your skills, mister." "Garrick," the mayor said, eyeing Cole's calloused hands and strong build. "Miss Abbott has been after us about those repairs since spring, but with the mine expansion and new settlers coming in, we've been stretched thin." "I can start tomorrow," Cole said. "I will need materials." "Talk to Jenkins at the lumberyard, he will set you up." The mayor hesitated. "You served, didn't you? Which side?" Cole's jaw tightened, the side that lost. To his surprise, Mayor Hargrove nodded without rancor. "War's over, son. Out here, we judge a man by what he can do, not which uniform he wore. The children need that school, and Miss Abbott deserves better than what we have provided her." That night, as Cole ate his solitary dinner at the boarding house, he caught snatches of conversation about the schoolteacher. "Him all the way from Massachusetts. Father was some kind of professor. Could have married well back east, but wanted to make a difference out here. Turned down the banker's son flat last month. Cole found himself listening more intently than he should have. Lydia Abbott was clearly respected in Silverpine, though she remained something of an enigma to the townsfolk. An educated Eastern woman choosing the hardships of frontier life was unusual enough to spark speculation. As he retired to his room, Cole told himself his interest was merely curiosity about a fellow outsider. But when he dreamed that night, it was again of chestnut hair and clear green eyes that seemed to see through the walls he had built around himself. Morning brought a crisp clarity to the air that spoke of approaching winter. Cole arrived at the schoolhouse early, before classes began, tools borrowed from the general store in hand. He set to work on the porch first, replacing rotted boards with fresh lumber. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Lydia's approach until her shadow fell across the planks. "You decided to stay," she observed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Cole straightened, wiping sawdust from his hands, "just until my horse is ready to travel." Of course, she wore a dark green dress today that brought out the color of her eyes. "Nevertheless, I am grateful. The children deserve a sound roof over their heads." Before Cole could respond, the first students began to arrive, eyeing the stranger with undisguised curiosity. Lydia greeted each by name, her manner warm yet commanding respect. Cole returned to his work, conscious of being observed not only by the children but by their teacher as well. Throughout the morning, as he worked on the exterior, he could hear Lydia's voice through the open windows, patient and encouraging as she guided her pupils through their lessons. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder of a world that continued to function with order and purpose despite the chaos that had consumed so much of the country. At midday, the children spilled out for their lunch break, many gathering around to watch Cole work. He acknowledged them with nods but kept his distance, uncomfortable with their innocent curiosity. "Mr. Garrick," one boy of about 10 ventured, "were you in the war?" "Tommy," Lydia's voice came from behind Cole, "that is not a polite question to ask someone you have just met." "It is all right," Cole said, looking up from his work. "Yes, I was in the war." "Did you kill anybody?" another boy asked eagerly. "That is enough," Lydia said firmly. "Go eat your lunches." As the children dispersed, she approached Cole with an apologetic expression. "I am sorry about that." They are fascinated by anything beyond their experience. "No harm done," Cole continued, measuring a replacement board. "Children ask what adults only think." "And what do the adults of Silverpine think about you, I wonder?" Lydia asked, settling on the edge of the porch. "That I am passing through, that I keep to myself, that I am better left alone." He cut the board with more force than necessary. "Is that what you think as well?" Cole paused, unused to such direct questioning. "I think that some men are not meant for settling. Because they do not wish to, or because they believe they cannot." He looked up at her then, struck by her perception. "Does it matter?" "I believe it does." Lydia held his gaze. "The war left many men thinking they have no place in peaceful society, that the violence they witnessed or enacted somehow marked them as separate from ordinary life." Cole's hands stilled on his tools. "Some things cannot be unseen, Miss Abbott. Or unfelt." "No," she agreed softly, "but they can be lived with, carried rather than escaped from." The school bell rang, saving Cole from having to respond. Lydia stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Will you join us for dinner tonight? Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house is hosting a small gathering. As our temporary repairman, you would be welcome." Cole's instinct was to refuse immediately. Social gatherings meant questions, conversations, the pretense of normalcy he had long abandoned. "I do not think," he began. "Please consider it," Lydia interrupted. "You might find Silverpine more hospitable than you expect." With that, she returned to her students, leaving Cole with the unsettling feeling that his carefully constructed isolation was being deliberately challenged. He worked through the afternoon, focusing on the physical demands of the labor to quiet his mind. By the time the school day ended, he had made significant progress on the porch and had begun assessing the roof repairs. As the last child departed, Lydia emerged with a stack of papers and a book tucked under her arm. "You have accomplished much today," she observed, surveying his work. "There is still more to do," Cole replied, gathering his tools. "The roof will take at least 2 days. Then it seems Silverpine will have the pleasure of your company a while longer." There was a hint of teasing in her tone that Cole found both unsettling and oddly pleasant. Have you reconsidered dinner? She asked as they walked toward town. Cole hesitated. The prospect of an evening alone in his room suddenly seemed less appealing than it had that morning. Perhaps, he conceded. Lydia smiled, and Cole was struck again by how it transformed her face, bringing warmth to features that were already lovely. 7 o'clock, she said. Nothing formal, just neighbors breaking bread together. As they reached the center of town, they parted ways, Lydia toward her small rented cottage and Cole toward the boarding house. He watched her go, aware that he was developing a dangerous habit of doing so. That evening, after cleaning up as best he could, Cole found himself standing outside the boarding house dining room at precisely 7 o'clock, listening to the murmur of conversation within. He nearly turned away twice before finally pushing open the door. The room fell momentarily silent as several pairs of eyes turned toward him. Mayor Hargrove was the first to speak. "Mr. Garrick, welcome. Come in, come in. We were just discussing the school repairs." Cole nodded his thanks, acutely aware of his status as an outsider in this gathering of people who knew each other well. But then Lydia appeared at his elbow, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress, her hair arranged more elaborately than it had been during the day. "I am glad you came," she said quietly, guiding him to an empty chair beside her own. The dinner was simple frontier fare: roast venison, potatoes, preserved vegetables from summer gardens, but prepared with care by the landlady. Conversation flowed around Cole, touching on town business, the coming winter, news from the east carried by the most recent mail coach. He spoke little, answering direct questions with minimal words, but found himself relaxing incrementally as the meal progressed. No one asked about the war or his past. No one seemed to expect anything from him beyond his current role as the schoolhouse repairman. It was a novel experience after years of keeping people at arm's length. After dinner, when the men retired to the porch with pipes and the women gathered near the fireplace, Lydia followed Cole outside. "You survived," she observed with a smile. "Barely," he replied, but without the edge that usually accompanied his words. They stood side by side in the cool evening air, watching as stars emerged in the darkening sky. "Why did you come west, Miss Abbott?" Cole found himself asking. "A woman with your education could have had a comfortable life in the east." Lydia considered the question, her profile thoughtful in the soft light spilling from the windows. "After the war, everything changed," she said finally. "My father taught at Harvard. 2 of my brothers fought for the Union. One never returned. The country was fractured, broken in ways that went beyond politics or geography." She turned to face Cole. "I wanted to be somewhere new, somewhere building something rather than rebuilding." "And have you found what you were looking for?" "I believe I am finding it," she replied. "These children, they have not been shaped by the bitterness of war. They see possibilities where many of us see only divisions." "You make it sound simple," Cole said. "Not simple, hopeful." Lydia's gaze was steady. "Hope is in short supply these days, Mr. Garrick. I choose to nurture it where I can." Cole looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I should return to work early tomorrow, the roof." "Of course," Lydia stepped back. "Thank you for coming tonight." As Cole walked back to his room, he was aware of a strange disquiet. Lydia Abbott represented everything he had been avoiding: connection, community, the possibility of a future beyond mere survival. The rational part of him recognized the danger. The part that had been dormant for 3 years whispered that perhaps the greater danger lay in continuing as he had been. The next day brought clouds and a biting wind that spoke of early snow. Cole worked on the schoolhouse roof, mindful of the weather closing in. Below, through the windows, he could hear Lydia conducting her classes. The older children were reciting poetry, Longfellow, he recognized, while the younger ones worked on their letters. During the lunch break, as the children huddled in the lee of the building to escape the wind, Lydia brought Cole a cup of hot coffee. "The children think you must have been a carpenter before the war," she said, handing him the steaming cup. Cole accepted it with murmured thanks. "My father was a builder in Virginia. I learned from him." It was the first personal detail he had volunteered, and Lydia seemed to recognize its significance. "Is he still there?" "Your father?" Cole shook his head. "Yellow fever before the war." "I am sorry." Her sympathy was genuine, without the awkwardness that often accompanied such expressions. "It was a long time ago." Cole sipped the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Your father, he still teaches?" "No, he passed last winter." Sadness flickered across her features. "That was another reason for my coming west. Too many ghosts in Boston." Yet you chose teaching like him. Lydia smiled. We carry forward what matters from those we have lost, I think. My father believed education was the foundation of a just society. I share that belief. Cole nodded, understanding more than he wished to about carrying forward legacies. His father had built homes for families. Cole had helped destroy them during the war. The irony was not lost on him. The storm coming in looks to be a strong one, he said, changing the subject. I will try to finish the roof before it hits. Do not risk yourself unnecessarily, Lydia cautioned. We have waited this long for repairs. We can wait a little longer if need be. The concern in her voice caught Cole off guard. It had been a long time since anyone had worried about his well-being. I will be careful, he promised, more gently than he had intended. Lydia's eyes held his for a moment longer than was proper, then she nodded and returned to her students. Cole watched her go, aware that something fundamental was shifting within him, like ground giving way beneath his feet. The afternoon brought darkening skies and a steady drop in temperature. Cole worked with increased urgency, determined to at least make the roof weathertight before the storm arrived. He was so focused on his task that he barely noticed the school day ending, the children dispersing quickly with anxious glances at the threatening clouds. Lydia emerged last, locking the schoolhouse door behind her. You should get inside, Cole called down to her. This weather is turning faster than I expected. And you should come down from there, she replied, concern evident in her voice. The roof can wait. Almost finished, he assured her, hammering down the last shingle. Go on ahead. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. Please do not delay too long. Cole watched her hurry toward town, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the rising wind. He worked for another 20 minutes, securing the last of the repairs as the first snowflakes began to fall. By the time he gathered his tools and descended from the roof, the snow was coming down in earnest, reducing visibility to a few yards. Cole cursed under his breath. The temperature had dropped precipitously, and the wind cut through his coat like a knife. He set out toward town, head bent against the strengthening gale. The storm had arrived with a ferocity unusual even for the mountains, transforming the familiar path into a treacherous white void. Within minutes, Cole could barely make out the shapes of buildings ahead. A particularly strong gust nearly knocked him off his feet, and he realized with growing concern that he had veered off course. The snow was falling so heavily now that his tracks were being covered almost as fast as he made them. Cole had survived enough winter campaigns to recognize the danger. Disorientation in such conditions could be fatal. He squinted through the whiteout, searching for any landmark that might guide him. A faint glow to his left suggested a window, shelter of some kind. He moved toward it, each step more difficult as the snow deepened. The glow resolved into the outline of a small cottage, light spilling from its windows like a beacon. Cole staggered the last few yards to the door and knocked, his hands numb with cold. The door opened immediately, as if someone had been watching for his approach. Lydia stood there, relief washing over her face. Thank God, she said, pulling him inside. I was about to send for help when you did not arrive at the boarding house. Got turned around in the storm, Cole admitted, stomping snow from his boots. Lucky I saw your light. Not luck, Lydia said. I put the lamp in the window when I realized how quickly the storm was worsening. She helped him remove his snow-covered coat. I feared someone might be caught out in it. The cottage was small but warm, a fire crackling in the hearth. It was simply furnished but bore touches of refinement, books lining one wall, a small writing desk by the window, a patchwork quilt of obvious quality draped over a chair. You should not be here, Cole said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. A single woman alone with a man half frozen by a blizzard, Lydia finished for him, her practical tone brooking no argument. I think the circumstances justify the breach of etiquette, Mr. Garrick. She guided him to a chair by the fire. Besides, in frontier towns, conventional rules often give way to necessity. She busied herself preparing tea, moving about the small space with efficient grace. Cole watched her, torn between gratitude for her hospitality and discomfort at the intimacy of the situation. The storm may last through the night, Lydia said, handing him a steaming cup. You are welcome to the chair by the fire. It is more comfortable than it looks. I cannot impose. It is not an imposition when it is freely offered, she interrupted, and I would rather not have your death from exposure on my conscience. There was a hint of humor in her tone that diffused Cole's protest. He accepted the tea, letting its warmth seep into his still-cold hands. "Thank you," he said simply. Lydia settled in the chair opposite him, her own cup cradled between her palms. The firelight caught the reddish highlights in her chestnut hair and softened the planes of her face. In that moment she looked younger than her 21 years, yet possessed of a quiet strength that transcended age. "You have been running for a long time, haven't you?" she asked quietly. Cole stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "The way you hold yourself apart, the way you watch doorways and windows, always aware of exits, the way you speak of staying in one place as though it were a death sentence." Her perception was unsettling. "The war taught me caution," he said carefully. "The war taught many things," Lydia agreed, "but it ended 3 years ago." "Not for everyone," the words escaped before Cole could stop them. Lydia's expression softened with understanding. "No, not for everyone." Outside, the wind howled around the eaves of the small cottage, rattling the windows in their frames. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm had created a strange intimacy, isolating them from the world beyond these four walls. "What are you running from, Cole?" Lydia asked, using his given name for the first time. Perhaps it was the use of his name, or the genuine concern in her voice, or simply the exhaustion of maintaining his guard for so long, but Cole found himself answering. "During the war, I served with a cavalry unit in the Shenandoah Valley. We were tasked with destroying Union supply lines, burning crops, mills, anything that could support their forces." He stared into the fire, seeing not the flames but the smoke-filled skies of Virginia. "I told myself it was necessary, strategy, but the faces of the women and children we left homeless, they follow me still." Lydia listened without interruption, her gaze steady. "After Appomattox, I returned to what was left of our town. Everything was gone, our home, our neighbors, the life we had known." Cole's voice was flat, emotionless. "I tried to rebuild. To start again, but the nightmares, the memories." "So you came west," Lydia said softly. Cole nodded. "I thought distance might help, that I could outrun what I had seen, what I had done." He looked up at her. "But some things cannot be outrun, only carried, as you said. And do you still believe you must carry them alone?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond its simple words. Cole had no answer that would not expose the growing crack in his carefully constructed isolation. "I should check on the fire," he said instead, rising to add another log to the flames. Lydia did not press him, and Cole was grateful for her understanding of when to step back. They talked of safer things then, the progress on the schoolhouse, the children's education, the growing community of Silverpine. As the evening wore on, Cole found himself relaxing into the conversation, sharing anecdotes from his travels that contained no blood or grief. Lydia spoke of her life in Boston, her father's academic circles, her decision to come west against her family's wishes. There was humor in her stories and determination, and an underlying current of the same restlessness that had driven Cole across the continent. "We are not so different, you and I," she observed as the fire burned low. "Both seeking something we could not find where we began." "You seem to have found your purpose here," Cole said. "Your students adore you." Lydia smiled, but there was a hint of wistfulness in it. "Teaching fulfills me, yes. But there are other longings of the heart that remain, unsatisfied." The admission, so honest and unguarded, created a moment of tension between them. Cole became acutely aware of their solitude, the storm that had thrown them together, the growing attraction he had been fighting since their first meeting. "It is late," he said, breaking the moment. "You should rest." Lydia nodded, rising gracefully. "I will bring you blankets for the chair." When she returned with the promised bedding, their hands brushed as she passed them to him. Cole felt the contact like a current through his body, awakening sensations he had thought long deadened by war and wandering. "Good night, Cole," she said softly. "Good night, Lydia." She disappeared into the small bedroom at the back of the cottage, closing the door gently behind her. Cole stood for a long moment, staring at the space she had occupied, feeling as though something essential had shifted within him. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the walls of Lydia's cottage, Cole slept more peacefully than he had in years. Morning brought silence, the peculiar hush that follows a heavy snowfall. Cole woke to find sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating a world transformed by white. The storm had passed, leaving behind nearly 2 feet of pristine snow, Lydia emerged from her room, already dressed for the day, her hair braided and pinned up neatly. "Good morning," she greeted him. "It seems winter has arrived with a vengeance." Cole rose, folding the blankets she had provided. "Thank you for your hospitality. I should return to town before people begin to wonder where we are." Of course, was there a hint of disappointment in her voice. "I will accompany you. There will be no school today. The children cannot possibly make it through these drifts." They breakfasted simply on bread and coffee, then prepared to venture into the snow-covered landscape. Cole insisted on breaking a path for Lydia, his longer legs better suited to the task of pushing through the deep snow. The town was just beginning to dig itself out when they arrived, men shoveling paths between buildings, women sweeping snow from porches. Their appearance together from the direction of Lydia's cottage raised a few eyebrows, but the emergency of the storm provided sufficient explanation. At the boarding house, Cole found his room undisturbed, as if the previous night had been a dream. But the memory of Lydia's firelit face, her quiet questions, her understanding of his unspoken wounds, these were etched clearly in his mind. He spent the day helping clear snow from the main street and checking on his horse at the livery. The blacksmith had finally repaired the loose shoe, meaning Cole was free to leave as soon as the trails became passable again. The thought brought none of the relief it should have. That evening, as Cole sat in the saloon nursing a whiskey, Mayor Hargrove joined him. "That was fine work you did on the schoolhouse, Garrick," he said, settling his substantial frame onto the adjacent stool. "Roof held through that monster of a storm without a single leak." "Glad to hear it," Cole replied, genuinely pleased that his work had proven sound. "Town could use a man with your skills," Hargrove continued, signaling the barkeep for a drink. "Jenkins at the lumberyard is looking to retire. Been talking about selling the business to someone who knows the trade." Cole looked up sharply. "I am not staying, Mayor." "No," Hargrove accepted his whiskey with a nod of thanks. "Shame. Thought you might be considering it, given your interest in our schoolteacher." Cole's jaw tightened. Miss Abbott kindly offered shelter during the storm, nothing more. Of course, the mayor sipped his drink thoughtfully. "Still, a man reaches a point where wandering loses its appeal. I speak from experience." Cole could not hide his surprise. Hargrove seemed the epitome of the settled man, deeply rooted in the community he served. "Spent 5 years after the war drifting from place to place, taking odd jobs, drinking too much, fighting when the mood took me." Hargrove's eyes grew distant with memory. "Was running from ghosts, same as you, Antietam. Worst day of my life." Cole said nothing, but his grip on his glass tightened. "Found myself in Silverpine by accident. Stage broke down, had to wait 3 days for repairs." Hargrove smiled ruefully. "Met a widow with 2 young children who needed help rebuilding her barn. Stayed a week, then a month. Been here 12 years now." "Your point, Mayor." "No point, son. Just an observation that sometimes what we're running from isn't half as important as what we might be running to." Hargrove finished his whiskey and stood. "Jenkins will be at the lumberyard tomorrow morning if you want to talk to him." "No obligation." As the mayor departed, Cole remained at the bar, turning the conversation over in his mind. The idea of staying in Silverpine, of putting down roots anywhere, had not entered his conscious thoughts until now. Yet he could not deny that something had changed since his arrival in this mountain town, or perhaps since his first glimpse of a chestnut-haired schoolteacher in a blue dress. The next morning found Cole at the lumberyard, not entirely sure how he had arrived at this decision. Jenkins was a taciturn man in his 60s, his hands gnarled from decades of working with wood, his knowledge of the trade evident in every movement. "Mayor says you might be interested in taking over the business," Jenkins said without preamble. "I am considering it," Cole replied, surprised at his own words. Jenkins nodded as if this was completely reasonable. "Could use an apprentice for a few months first. Make sure you know the local woods, the suppliers, the customers, then we could discuss terms." "I have not decided to stay," Cole felt compelled to clarify. Jenkins gave him a knowing look. "Nobody ever decides to stay in Silverpine, son. They just wake up one day and realize they already have." The old man showed Cole around the yard, explaining the operation with the efficiency of someone who had run the business for 30 years. By the end of the tour, Cole found himself genuinely interested in the possibility. The work was honest, the income steady, the enterprise essential to a growing community. "Think on it," Jenkins said as they concluded. Offers open until spring. After that, my rheumatism and I are headed to California to live with my daughter. Cole thanked him and walked back toward town, his mind racing with unexpected possibilities. The idea of staying in Silverpine, of having a purpose beyond mere survival, was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was so absorbed in these thoughts that he nearly collided with Lydia, who was emerging from the general store. "Cole," she exclaimed, steadying herself with a hand on his arm, "I was just coming to find you." "Is something wrong?" he asked immediately, concern sharpening his focus. "Not at all," she assured him. "With school canceled due to the snow, I was hoping you might accompany me on an errand. One of my students lives on a farm about a mile outside town. His mother is expecting a baby soon, and I wanted to bring them some supplies." "Of course," Cole agreed without hesitation. "The trails will be difficult after the storm. Hence my seeking a strong escort," Lydia said with a smile that warmed Cole more than was proper. They gathered the necessary supplies, food staples, warm clothing for the new baby, books for the older children, and set out along the snow-covered trail that led east from town. The day was clear and bright, the sun transforming the snow into a dazzling carpet that stretched to the horizon. They walked side by side, Cole occasionally offering his arm to Lydia when the path grew treacherous. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they had both read, places they had seen, experiences that had shaped them. Cole found himself sharing stories he had told no one since before the war, memories of his childhood in Virginia, his father's craftsmanship, his mother's gardens. Lydia listened with genuine interest, offering her own memories in return: summers on Cape Cod, her first teaching position in a Boston charity school, her decision to answer the advertisement for a teacher in Colorado Territory. "My mother thought I had lost my mind," she admitted with a laugh. "She still writes weekly, trying to convince me to return east and marry a suitable gentleman." "And have you found no suitable gentleman in Silverpine?" Cole asked, immediately regretting the question. Lydia's glance was both thoughtful and direct. "I have found that my definition of suitable has changed since coming west," she said. "Eastern conventions seem less important than character, courage, and the capacity for growth." Before Cole could respond to this pointed observation, a sound caught his attention, the distant but unmistakable report of a rifle, followed by shouts. "Stay here," he instructed Lydia, his hand automatically moving to the revolver at his hip. "No," she countered firmly. "That came from the Douglas farm, where we are headed." Without waiting for his agreement, she quickened her pace, forcing Cole to follow. They crested a small rise and the farmstead came into view below, a modest cabin, a barn, a corral for livestock. 3 mounted men were visible in the yard, their horses moving restlessly in the snow. "Raiders," Cole murmured, recognizing the type immediately. The war had created countless displaced men who survived by preying on isolated homesteads. "We need to get back to town for help." "There is no time," Lydia said, her voice tight with fear. "Mrs. Douglas is alone with the children. Her husband took their only horse to fetch the doctor yesterday." Even as she spoke, one of the riders dismounted and approached the cabin door, rifle in hand. Cole assessed the situation with the rapid calculation born of wartime necessity. 3 armed men, civilians at risk inside. "No time for reinforcements from town. Stay hidden," he told Lydia, drawing his Colt. "If this goes badly, run back to Silverpine." "Cole," she began, but he was already moving, descending the slope at an angle that would bring him to the side of the barn, using the structure for cover. The snow muffled his approach, allowing him to reach the barn undetected. Through a gap in the boards, he could see the 3 raiders more clearly now. Trail-worn, desperate men, the kind that had become all too common in the aftermath of war. The dismounted man was pounding on the cabin door, demanding entry. Cole moved to the corner of the barn, taking careful aim. "Step away from that door," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. The raiders froze, then scattered for cover, one diving behind the well, another crouching by the corral, the third, the one at the door, using the cabin porch as shelter. "Just one man," the raider behind the well shouted. "We got him outnumbered." "I only need to hit what I aim at," Cole replied steadily. "First man who raises a weapon gets a bullet, your choice." A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous whickering of the raiders' horses. Cole kept his revolver trained on the man nearest the cabin, the greatest immediate threat to those inside. "We just want food and valuables," the man by the corral called out. No need for bloodshed. There are children in that cabin, Cole said, his voice hardening. You will mount up and ride away, now. He could sense their hesitation, the calculation of risk versus reward. 3 against 1 were good odds, but the certainty in Cole's voice gave them pause. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, then a new voice entered the standoff. He is not alone. Lydia stood at the edge of the clearing, Mayor Hargrove's shotgun, which she must have taken from their supplies, held with surprising steadiness in her hands. Cole nearly swore aloud at her foolhardy bravery, but kept his expression impassive, allowing the raiders to believe they were now caught in a crossfire. Last chance, he said flatly, ride out or die here. The leader, the man by the cabin, made his decision. Mount up, he ordered his companions. Too much trouble for what it's worth. Slowly watching Cole and Lydia for any sign of aggression, the 3 men backed toward their horses. Cole maintained his aim until they had mounted and turned their horses away from the farm. If I see you in this territory again, he called after them, I will not be so generous. Only when the raiders had disappeared from sight did Cole lower his weapon. He turned to Lydia, anger and relief warring in his expression. That was reckless, he said tightly. I told you to stay hidden. And let you face 3 armed men alone, Lydia's chin lifted defiantly. I made a choice. Before Cole could respond, the cabin door opened cautiously, and a woman's voice called out, Are they gone? Yes, Mrs. Douglas, Lydia replied, hurrying toward the cabin. You are safe now. The woman who emerged was heavy with child, her face pale with fear but composed. Behind her clustered 3 children, the oldest, a boy of about 12, holding an ancient hunting rifle that looked too large for his frame. Thank God you came when you did, Miss Abbott, Mrs. Douglas said, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. I feared, she broke off, unwilling to voice her fears in front of the children. We brought supplies, Lydia said, gesturing to the bundle she had somehow managed to keep hold of throughout the confrontation, and it seems we arrived just in time. Cole joined them on the porch, his anger at Lydia's risk-taking tempered by admiration for her courage. Those men should not return, he assured Mrs. Douglas, but it would be wise to keep the doors barred until your husband returns. The woman nodded gratefully. Please come inside. It is the least I can do after what you've done for us. The cabin was small but warm, the main room serving as both kitchen and living area. Despite the modest surroundings, there was an atmosphere of care and comfort, handmade quilts on the beds visible through an open door, children's drawings pinned to the walls, the scent of fresh-baked bread. Lydia immediately set about organizing the supplies they had brought, enlisting the children's help to create a sense of normalcy after the frightening encounter. Cole found himself watching her interaction with the family, struck by the natural ease with which she calmed the children and reassured their mother. Your man handled those outlaws like he's faced worse, Mrs. Douglas said quietly to Lydia as they prepared tea. Oh, Mr. Garrick is not Lydia began, then stopped, a flush rising to her cheeks. Yes, he has seen combat. Cole pretended not to have heard the exchange, but a strange warmth spread through him at the woman's assumption, and at Lydia's incomplete denial. They stayed for an hour, ensuring the family was settled and the farmstead secure before beginning the journey back to town. The winter sun was already low on the horizon as they set out, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. They walked in silence for a time, each processing the events at the farm. It was Cole who finally spoke. You could have been killed, he said, but the anger had drained from his voice, leaving only concern. So could you, Lydia replied simply. I made the choice I could live with. Cole glanced at her, seeing her in a new light. This was not merely a genteel Easterner playing at frontier life. Lydia Abbott possessed a core of steel that matched anything he had seen in his fellow soldiers. You surprised me, he admitted. Few men would have shown such courage, let alone. A woman, Lydia finished for him, a challenging note in her voice. I was going to say a schoolteacher, Cole corrected, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Lydia's expression softened. The children were in danger, there was no time for fear. That, Cole said quietly, is the definition of courage. They continued walking, the trail narrowing as it wound through a stand of pines. Cole offered his arm and Lydia took it, her gloved hand resting lightly in the crook of his elbow. The contact was proper, yet Cole felt it as intimately as a caress. Jenkins offered me an apprenticeship at the lumberyard, he said abruptly. with the possibility of taking over the business when he leaves in the spring. Lydia's step faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Will you accept? Cole hesitated, then answered with an honesty that surprised himself. I do not know. For 3 years I have not stayed anywhere longer than a month. The idea of settling, it feels foreign. Yet you are considering it, Lydia observed, her tone carefully neutral. I am. She nodded, respecting his reticence with characteristic perception. Silverpine would be fortunate to have you, she said simply. The light was fading rapidly as they approached town, the first lamps being lit in windows along the main street. Cole was acutely conscious of Lydia's hand on his arm, the rhythm of her breathing beside him, the scent of lavender that somehow clung to her even after their adventure at the farm. At the door of her cottage, they paused. The moment felt weighted with unspoken words, possibilities hovering in the space between them. Thank you for accompanying me today, Lydia said, her voice softer than usual. And for what you did at the farm. I should be thanking you, Cole replied. Your courage may have saved lives. Lydia smiled, the expression illuminated by the lamplight spilling from her window. Perhaps we can agree that we make a good team. The words hung in the air, laden with meaning beyond their surface. Cole found himself unable to look away from her face, from the clear green eyes that seemed to see through the barriers he had spent years constructing. Perhaps we do, he said finally, his voice rough with emotions he was only beginning to acknowledge. For a breathless moment it seemed he might step closer, might bridge the careful distance he had maintained, but the habits of 3 years reasserted themselves, and he stepped back instead. Good night, Lydia. Good night, Cole. As he walked back to the boarding house, Cole was conscious of a battle raging within him, between the instinct for solitude that had kept him alive since Appomattox and the growing recognition that mere survival might not be enough anymore. The following days brought clear skies and warming temperatures that began to melt the deep snow. Cole completed the remaining repairs on the schoolhouse as classes resumed. Each day, he told himself he would collect his pay and move on. Each evening found him still in Silverpine, drawn by forces he was reluctant to name. He began spending mornings at the lumberyard, learning from Jenkins about the local timber, the seasonal demands of the business, the customers from surrounding settlements. The work appealed to him, honest labor that created rather than destroyed, that built communities rather than tearing them apart. In the afternoons, he often found himself lingering near the schoolhouse, timing his departure from the lumberyard to coincide with the end of the school day. Lydia never seemed surprised to find him waiting, accepting his offer to walk her home with a smile that warmed something long frozen within him. Their conversations during these walks deepened, touching on hopes and fears they had shared with no one else. Cole spoke of his nightmares, of the faces that haunted him from burned-out farms in the Shenandoah. Lydia confessed her occasional loneliness, her doubts about having left her remaining family behind for an uncertain future on the frontier. Do you regret coming west? Cole asked her once as they paused on the bridge that crossed the creek at the edge of town. Lydia considered the question, her gaze on the rushing water below. No, she said finally, there is a freedom here that I never found in Boston. Room to become who I truly am, rather than who society expected me to be. And who is that, the true Lydia Abbott? She looked up at him then, her expression both vulnerable and determined. I am still discovering her, but I know she is someone who chooses her own path, who is not afraid to risk her heart for what matters. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. November gave way to December, bringing the festive preparations that even frontier towns embraced with enthusiasm. The schoolhouse was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, the children practicing carols and recitations for the Christmas pageant. Cole found himself volunteered, through Lydia's gentle persistence, to build the stable backdrop for the nativity scene. Working on this project in the evenings, in the empty schoolroom after the children had gone, Cole was conscious of a growing sense of belonging. Lydia would often stay as well, grading papers or preparing lessons at her desk while he measured and sawed and fitted the pieces together. You are good with your hands, she observed one evening, coming to stand beside him as he worked. Cole glanced up, a smile once rare, now increasingly common, crossing his features. My father always said a man should create something that outlasts him. Is that why you are considering Jenkins's offer? Lydia asked, her tone carefully casual. Cole set down his tools, giving the question the consideration it deserved. Partly, he admitted, but there are other reasons to stay in Silverpine. Their eyes met, and for once, Cole did not look away. In the lamplight, Lydia's beauty struck him anew, the graceful curve of her neck, the intelligence in her clear gaze, the strength and gentleness that coexisted in her character. "I would be glad if you stayed," she said softly. "The town needs good men." "And what of Lydia Abbott? What does she need?" The directness of the question surprised them both. Lydia's cheeks colored slightly, but she held his gaze. "She needs to know that the man who might stay would be staying for the right reasons, not out of obligation or convenience or fear of continuing on." Her voice was steady despite the emotion behind her words. "She has built a life here, a purpose. She cannot risk that for uncertainty." Cole understood what she was asking, for clarity, for honesty, for a decision made with full awareness of its implications. "I have wandered for 3 years," he said slowly, telling myself I was seeking something, but I believe now I was hiding, from memories, from responsibility, from the possibility of loss. He stepped closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I am tired of hiding, Lydia." Her breath caught audibly. "What are you saying, Cole?" "That I am considering Jenkins's offer for many reasons, but the most compelling reason to stay in Silverpine is standing before me now." The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything. Lydia's expression softened, vulnerability and hope mingling in her features. "That is a powerful reason," she said quietly, "but also a frightening one." "For us both," Cole agreed. "I have not allowed myself to care for anyone since the war. The risk seemed too great. And now I find that the risk of not caring, of continuing alone, has become greater still." Lydia's smile then was like sunrise after the longest night, illuminating possibilities Cole had denied himself for too long. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he raised his hand to her cheek. The touch was electric, a connection that transcended the physical. Lydia leaned almost imperceptibly into his palm, her eyes never leaving his. "We should return to town," she said, though her tone held regret. "It grows late." Cole nodded, reluctantly lowering his hand. The moment had changed something fundamental between them, creating an awareness that could not be undone. They walked back to Lydia's cottage in a silence that held more meaning than words could express. At her door, Cole took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that belonged to a more courtly age. "Good night, Lydia." "Good night, Cole." As he walked back to the boarding house, Cole felt lighter than he had in years, as though a burden he had carried since Appomattox had finally begun to lift. For the first time since the war, he allowed himself to consider a future, not just survival from day to day, but a life with purpose, with roots, with love. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a cautious hope that was almost painful in its intensity. The following Sunday, Cole attended church services for the first time since before the war. He sat in the back row, uncomfortable in his best shirt, acutely aware of the curious glances from the townsfolk. Silverpine had grown accustomed to his presence, but this public participation in a community ritual marked a shift in his status from transient to potential permanent resident. Lydia sat near the front with some of her students, her chestnut hair arranged elegantly beneath a modest hat, her blue Sunday dress emphasizing the grace of her posture. She had not appeared surprised to see Cole when he entered, merely offering a smile that seemed to illuminate the simple wooden church. After the service, as the congregation gathered outside to socialize in the crisp December air, Mayor Hargrove approached Cole. "Good to see you joining us, Garrick," he said, his handshake firm. "Jenkins tells me you're learning the lumber business." "I am considering it," Cole confirmed, uncomfortable with the public acknowledgement of his shifting intentions. "Excellent. Town council's meeting tomorrow evening. We'd welcome your attendance." The mayor's expression was deliberately casual, but Cole recognized the significance of the invitation, another step toward integration into the community. Before Cole could respond, Lydia joined them, exchanging greetings with the mayor before turning to Cole. "I was hoping you might join me for dinner," she said. "Mrs. Henderson has been asking when you would accept her invitation." The landlady of the boarding house had indeed been dropping hints about Sunday dinner, but Cole had always declined, preferring solitude to the social expectations of the communal meal. Today, however, looking at Lydia's expectant expression, he found his reluctance melting away. "I would be honored," he replied, offering his arm, As they walked toward the boarding house, Cole was conscious of the approving glances that followed them. In the space of a few weeks, he had gone from anonymous drifter to a man courting. There was no other word for it, the town's respected schoolteacher. The transition should have made him uneasy, should have triggered his instinct to flee. Instead, he felt an unfamiliar sense of rightness, as though pieces long scattered were finally falling into place. The boarding house dining room was crowded with Sunday guests, the doctor and his wife, the banker, several merchants and their families. Cole found himself seated beside Lydia at the long table, included in conversations about town business, the coming Christmas celebrations, plans for spring improvements. Mr. Garrick, I understand you're considering taking over Jenkins's lumberyard, the banker said as plates of roast beef and vegetables were passed. A sound investment, the territory's growing fast and building supplies will only increase in demand. I have not made a final decision, Cole replied, uncomfortable with the presumption. But you're leaning toward staying, the doctor's wife suggested, her glance moving meaningfully between Cole and Lydia. Cole felt Lydia tense slightly beside him at the unsubtle implication. He hesitated, then answered with a directness that silenced the table momentarily. I came to Silverpine intending to pass through. I have found reasons to reconsider. His gaze met Lydia's briefly. Good reasons. The conversation resumed around them, but Cole was aware only of Lydia's expression, a mixture of surprise, pleasure, and something deeper that made his heart race. After dinner, as the gathering dispersed, Lydia touched Cole's arm lightly. Would you walk with me? The afternoon is too fine to spend indoors. They strolled toward the creek, following a path now cleared of snow by frequent use. The December air was cold but not bitter, the winter sun casting long shadows from the bare trees. You surprised me today, Lydia said when they were beyond earshot of the town, at dinner. I surprised myself, Cole admitted. I have spent 3 years avoiding commitments, connections. Now I find myself considering both. Because of the lumberyard opportunity. Because of you, the words emerged with a simplicity that belied their significance. You have made me question everything I thought I knew about my future. Lydia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. And what do you see now when you think of that future? Cole took a breath, knowing his answer would change everything between them. I see possibility, a life beyond survival, work that creates rather than destroys. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I see you, Lydia, if you would have a man still finding his way back from darkness. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. I have seen your light, Cole Garrick, even when you could not see it yourself. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. Cole's hands framed Lydia's face with infinite care, as though she were made of something precious and fragile. Her lips were soft beneath his, yielding yet matching his intensity in a way that spoke of equal partnership rather than submission. When they parted, Cole rested his forehead against hers, his breath visible in the cold air between them. I have wandered long enough, he said softly. I want to build something lasting with you if you will have me. Yes, Lydia whispered, the single word containing volumes. Yes. The Christmas pageant transformed the schoolhouse from a place of learning to a center of community celebration. Every family in Silverpine and from the surrounding homesteads gathered to watch the children perform the nativity story and sing carols practiced for weeks under Lydia's patient guidance. Cole sat in the audience, watching with pride as the stable he had built provided the backdrop for the performance. More than that, he watched Lydia, the joy in her expression as she directed the children, the grace with which she handled the inevitable minor disasters of live performance, the way her face lit up when she caught his eye from across the room. After the final carol, as families lingered to exchange Christmas greetings and compliment the young performers, Mayor Hargrove called for attention. Before we disperse to our homes on this blessed evening, I have an announcement that I believe will bring joy to our community. He gestured to Jenkins, who stepped forward. Our longtime lumberyard owner has decided to retire come spring, as many of you know. Tonight, I am pleased to announce that the business will continue under new ownership. Cole felt Lydia's hand slip into his as all eyes turned toward him. Cole Garrick has agreed to take over the yard, Jenkins announced, his gruff voice carrying clearly through the room. He'll be apprenticing with me through the winter and assume full ownership in April. A murmur of approval ran through the gathering. Cole, uncomfortable with the attention but determined not to show it, nodded his acknowledgement of the congratulations called from around the room. Furthermore, Mayor Hargrove continued, his expression knowing, I believe Mr. Garrick may have another announcement to make. The invitation was clear. Cole had discussed his intentions with the mayor earlier that day, seeking his blessing as the town's leading citizen for what he planned. Now, with the entire community as witness, he turned to Lydia. Her eyes widened as she read his purpose in his expression. Cole, she whispered, are you certain? More certain than I have been of anything since before the war, he replied, loud enough for only her to hear. Then, in view of the assembled townsfolk, Cole Garrick, who had spent 3 years avoiding connections of any kind, knelt before Lydia Abbott and took her hand in his. I came to Silverpine a wanderer, believing I had nothing to offer and nothing to seek beyond another day's survival, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. You saw something in me I had forgotten existed. You helped me remember what it means to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than fear, to love rather than merely endure. Lydia's free hand covered her mouth, tears gleaming in her eyes. Lydia Abbott, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a life together in this place where we have both found new beginnings? Time seemed to suspend as Cole waited for her answer, aware of the hushed audience around them yet seeing only Lydia's face. Yes, she said finally, her voice clear and certain. With all my heart, yes. The schoolhouse erupted in applause and cheers as Cole rose to his feet, drawing Lydia into an embrace that balanced propriety with unmistakable joy. In that moment, surrounded by the community that had, almost without his noticing, become his own, Cole felt the last shadows of his wartime ghosts recede. He had promised Lydia forever. Her smile, radiant with love and certainty, said she was already home. The wedding took place in early spring, when the snow had melted from the valleys though it still crowned the distant peaks. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the church filled to overflowing with well-wishers. Cole stood at the altar, scarcely recognizing himself in the new suit ordered from Denver, his face clean-shaven, his hair trimmed. 3 months ago he had been a drifter with no plans beyond the next horizon. Today he was a businessman, a property owner, and most miraculously, a bridegroom. When Lydia appeared at the church door, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the congregation. Her dress, sewn by the women of Silverpine as a wedding gift, was simple yet elegant, the white fabric adorned with delicate embroidery. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an intricate style beneath a veil of fine lace, and she carried a bouquet of early spring wildflowers. But it was her expression that caught Cole's breath in his throat, the radiant certainty, the unwavering love, the promise of a shared future that shone in her eyes as she walked toward him. As she took her place beside him, Cole felt a peace he had not known since before the war. The minister's words washed over him, sacred vows of commitment that once would have terrified him, but now felt like coming home after the longest journey. I, Cole, take thee, Lydia, to be my wedded wife, he said, his voice strong and clear, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Lydia's vows were equally firm, her green eyes never leaving his as she pledged herself to him for all their days to come. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed his bride with a reverence that spoke of his recognition of the precious gift he had been given, not just Lydia's love, but the chance at a life he had believed forever lost to him. The celebration that followed at the newly completed town hall was joyous and uninhibited, the entire community sharing in the happiness of the couple who had found each other against all odds. There was music and dancing, feasting and toasting, laughter that chased away the last lingering ghosts of wartime grief. As evening approached, Cole and Lydia slipped away from the celebration, riding in a decorated wagon to the small house Cole had been preparing for the past 3 months. Located at the edge of town, near enough for Lydia to walk to the schoolhouse yet private enough to feel like a world of their own, the house represented everything Cole had once thought beyond his reach: permanence, security, home. He lifted Lydia from the wagon with careful hands, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrick," he said softly, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Lydia turned slowly, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings, the wooden floors Cole had laid himself, the stone fireplace that would warm them through mountain winters to come. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears of happiness brimming in her eyes. "Everything I dreamed of but never dared expect." Cole drew her into his arms, still marveling that he had the right to hold her this way, to call her his wife. "I promised you forever," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is just the beginning." Lydia's smile, radiant with love and trust, told him all he needed to know. "I'm already home," she said simply, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I've been home since the moment I found you." As twilight deepened into night outside their windows, Cole Garrick, no longer a wanderer but a man firmly rooted in love and community, held his wife close and gave thanks for the storm that had driven him to Silverpine, for the broken shoe that had delayed his departure, and most of all, for the woman who had seen in him the possibility of redemption. The war had taught him that some things could not be outrun. Lydia had taught him that with love they could be faced, accepted, and ultimately transcended. Together they had found what neither could have found alone, the courage to build something lasting from the ashes of the past. As Cole kissed his bride in the home they would share for all their days to come, he knew with absolute certainty that his wandering days were over. In Lydia's arms, in the community of Silverpine, in the future they would forge together, Cole Garrick had finally found his true north, his anchor, his home. The promise of forever had been made, and Lydia's smile, filled with love, trust, and certainty, told the world she was already home.